What if everything you know about Giza is missing a piece? Imagine standing on the plateau at dusk. The heat drains from the stones, the crowds scatter, silence drapes the desert like a veil. 3 pyramids cut the last light, their edges sharp as blades, their faces glowing like old honey. And then, you catch it. A 4th shape, a darker pyramid where none should be. You blink and it's gone. But the question lingers, bright as a spark behind the eyes. Were there ever 4? Tonight on Chronicle of Secrets, we'll chase that shadow. From travelers' maps browned by centuries, to satellite scans that pierce the sand, to testimonies that refuse to fade. Because what we think is the whole story of Giza may only be the outline of something greater. Giza resists certainty. For nearly 5,000 years, those stone ridges and towering monoliths have mocked our confidence. We come armed with theories about cosmic alignments, stairways to eternity, hidden technologies, even lost sources of power. Some rest on solid evidence, others rise from speculation or fantasy. But all of them reveal something about us. Our need to believe the ancients stood closer to the extraordinary than we do. The past, however, does not cater to desire. It offers glimpses, then buries the rest in silence. That is the paradox of Giza. It gives just enough to astonish and withholds just enough to torment. Consider the reports that refuse to die. In the 18th century, European travelers described a 4th pyramid, a monument of black stone, harder than granite, standing apart from the 3 giants we know. Archaeologists dismissed it as confusion. Yet the sketches remain, as if daring us to look again at the empty horizon. Greek historians spoke of a labyrinth, corridors upon corridors, vast enough to humble men who had seen the wonders of their own world. Was it exaggeration? Or the fading memory of an administrative heart later drowned and dismantled? Its stones are gone, but the echo of their words lingers. And beneath the impassive face of the great Sphinx, modern surveys detect cavities in the bedrock. Are they mere fractures of limestone, or the fingerprints of human hands? Some imagine sealed archives, others, nothing but hollow stone. Either way, the questions outlive the answers. After decades of watching theories rise and fall, I've learned to sort what scholarship accepts, what remains contested, and what belongs to speculation. Yet one indulgence I allow myself, a drawer in my mind that never closes. Into it, I place the claims too stubborn to vanish, too insistent to ignore. They are not proven. They are not disproven. And in Giza, it is often from those shadows, half denied, half remembered, that the brightest light eventually falls. The idea of a 4th pyramid sounds like a footnote, the kind of rumor that should have died 2 centuries ago. And yet, the record refuses to let it go. In the 18th century, a Danish officer, no mystic, no charlatan, but a trained cartographer, sketched something unusual on the plateau. He described stone darker and harder than any casing limestone, a cap formed not by tapering blocks, but by a single massive slab, and a placement slightly west of the familiar line of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. His drawings traveled through Europe, whispering of a monument that modern textbooks insist does not exist. Skeptics dismiss it with confidence. They remind us that travelers confused mastabas with pyramids all the time, folded Saqqara into Giza, or inflated ruins into giants. And yes, scale and distance are easily mangled by the eye. But material? That is harder to misremember. To notice stone darker than granite, denser, almost metallic in grain, that is a tactile memory, not a cartographic error. Where are the foundations? The critics ask. Where is the rubble cone, the quarry mark, the evidence? Fair questions. But Egypt does not play fair with evidence. Sand buries selectively. Wind sorts the surface like a deck of cards, and Cairo's builders stripped casing blocks by the millions. A missing ruin in this landscape is not proof of absence. It is only proof that the desert guards its secrets well. And then there is the matter of color. In Egyptian thought, black was not emptiness. It was rebirth. It was the fertile silt of the Nile, the promise that death was a passage, not an end. To cloak a pyramid in black would not be random. It would be a statement, a challenge to the sunlit whiteness of its neighbors. It would say, "This tomb is not like the others." Does that mean a massive pyramid still sleeps beneath the dunes? Unlikely. But could it mean that once, on the western edge of the plateau, there stood a darker monument, stripped, plundered, forgotten, yet remembered faintly in the eyes of those who walked there first? That possibility is harder to bury than stone. And so I leave the file open. Because if a black pyramid once stood at Giza, it would change everything we think we know about why the ancients built as they did, and what message they meant to leave for the future. Egypt does not forget in straight lines. It remembers selectively, preserving one colossus in perfect defiance of time, while letting entire cities vanish without a trace. That is the cruel gift of the desert. It decides what survives, not us. Take Giza. Critics ask, if a fourth pyramid ever stood here, where are its foundations? Where is its rubble cone? But the question assumes permanence in a land that has none. Cairo's medieval builders pried casing stones to raise their mosques. Earthquakes loosened blocks that whined scattered like dice. Floods buried some footings, uncovered others. In Egypt, stone never simply disappears. It migrates, reappears, returns in unexpected shapes. A temple wall can be reborn as a city gate. A pyramid's skin can rise again as the facade of a mosque. Modern archaeology has given us eyes sharper than the human gaze. Ground-penetrating radar can peel away layers of drift. Magnetometry senses walls by their invisible tug. Satellites map alignments no traveler could see on foot. With these tools, we have resurrected entire lost cities, streets, granaries, workshops, where the surface showed only silence. If whole metropolises can sleep beneath a meter of sand, what makes us so sure the plateau has yielded up every secret? And yet, technology does not end mystery. It multiplies it. Surveys around the Sphinx revealed cavities deep in the bedrock. Are they natural fissures or sealed chambers cut by human hands? The data says something is there. What it refuses to say is what. Science hands us outlines but withholds certainty, and the desert smiles at our impatience. That is what the sand keeps: thresholds, not answers. Enough to provoke, never enough to satisfy. Which raises the unsettling question: if cities can vanish and reappear, if even the Sphinx rests on unspoken voids, then what else still lies beneath Giza, waiting for its turn to surface? For all the speculation that swirls around Giza, there are truths as solid as the limestone blocks underfoot. Start with orientation. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned to true north with an accuracy within 3 arc minutes, finer than the Greenwich meridian laid down thousands of years later. That precision is not a rumor, not an exaggeration. It is measurable. Whoever laid out the foundations possessed not only ambition, but an astonishing command of the sky. The plateau itself confirms this mastery. Khufu, Khafra, Menkaure. Their long shadows once stretched across the desert in deliberate symmetry. The southern faces lean just slightly inward, a correction so subtle it was only noticed under modern survey. The masons were not guessing. They were aiming at something higher than geometry: permanence. These structures were meant to last, not a generation, not a dynasty, but millennia. And then there is the Starlight. Even the most cautious scholars concede the resonance between the 3 pyramids and Orion's belt. Whether one sees a perfect overlay or only a symbolic echo, the intent to map heaven onto earth cannot be ignored. The Nile mirrored the Milky Way. The plateau mirrored the stars. At minimum, the builders worked with a cosmology that welded sky and stone, eternity above and eternity below. What's remarkable is that the certainty does not make the pyramids less mysterious. It makes them more so. If all we had were rumors of black pyramids or underground chambers, we could dismiss them as fantasy. But when we measure blocks weighing tons joined with seams tighter than a razor's edge, when we trace corridors aimed at specific constellations, when we verify alignments more accurate than most medieval cathedrals, then the mystery deepens. These are not the accidents of primitive builders. These are decisions, deliberate and confident, taken with tools we still struggle to reconstruct. So here is what we can say with confidence. The ancients knew the sky intimately, and they inscribed that knowledge into stone. They built with precision that endures earthquakes, sandstorms, even looters. They wove heaven and earth into one design. That is not speculation, that is fact. And yet, the very solidity of these facts sharpens the next question. If what we can prove is already this extraordinary, then what might lie in the shadows of what we cannot? If the pyramids were built to be seen, the labyrinth was built to be survived. Ancient writers, Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus, speak of a structure that dwarfed comprehension. 12 courts, 3,000 rooms, walls carved with the records of forgotten kings. They had seen wonders in their own world, the Parthenon, the Colossus of Rhodes. Yet they wrote that none compared to this. The pyramid inspired awe. The labyrinth inspired fear. Skeptics tell us the Greeks exaggerated, dazzled by ruins they could not measure. And yet the persistence of their accounts is striking. Different centuries, different pens, the same description. Scale beyond reckoning. Corridors designed to overwhelm. Chambers inscribed with dynasties erased from memory. When multiple voices across time converge on the same impossible image, it is harder to dismiss. Modern instruments add their own whisper. In 2008, ground surveys near Hawara revealed patterns underground, walls and voids stretching beyond the excavation grid. The data echoed the ancient claims, but publication was brief, almost hurried, before silence fell. Official denials followed. Why? Caution? National politics? Or fear that confirmation would rupture the neat chronology we have built for Egypt's past? The idea of a labyrinth unsettles because it reverses the pyramid's logic. A pyramid is vertical, visible for miles, proclaiming eternity. A labyrinth is horizontal, hidden, designed to swallow. One rises toward the gods. The other draws you inward into disorientation. If it existed, it was not just a building, it was Egypt, thinking in another dimension. And if the walls truly carried histories we have never read, then the loss is not architectural but civilizational. Entire dynasties, rituals, technologies vanished into the sand. So I hesitate to call it myth. Too many echoes, too many voids beneath our feet. Perhaps the labyrinth has been erased. Perhaps it sleeps still, its corridors intact, waiting for the day someone finds the courage or the folly to enter. But the more disturbing question is not whether the labyrinth once existed. It is this: if it does, what truths about Egypt are being kept from us? Among all the theories spun around Giza, none tempts the imagination more than this. What if the pyramids were not just tombs, but machines? Monuments not only to eternity, but to energy. It sounds outrageous. And yet, step inside the Great Pyramid, and the doubts begin to whisper. The joints are so tight a razor blade cannot slide between them. The granite beams of the king's chamber hum under pressure. Granite rich in quartz, capable of producing an electric charge when stressed. The casing that once gleamed white in the sun was made of limestone, a natural insulator. And the whole structure sits on a plateau threaded with water channels, the kind that generate electromagnetic currents as they flow. Coincidence? Perhaps. But a pyramid is not a pile of coincidences. It is deliberate design, multiplied thousands of times over. Mainstream scholars insist on restraint. There are no hieroglyphs describing wireless energy, no ancient texts celebrating light without flame. The funerary purpose is well attested. The pyramid as a tomb, as a stairway to the heavens, as a symbol of rebirth. And yet, physics does not bow to categories. Quartz still vibrates. Water still flows. Limestone still insulates. Whether or not the builders knew the equations, the ingredients of a resonant machine are present. That parallel grew louder in the modern age with Nikola Tesla. On Long Island, he built Wardenclyffe Tower, a structure meant to draw energy from the Earth itself and radiate it into the sky. Photographs show a form not unlike a truncated pyramid, capped with a conductor. Tesla believed the planet was a reservoir of power waiting for resonance. He failed, but his vision makes us glance back at Giza with unease. Were the ancients chasing a similar resonance, whether for ritual, for symbolism, or for something more? Here, I keep my discipline. I do not say the pyramids lit the Nile Valley, but I cannot dismiss the temptation either. Too many alignments, too many material choices, too many echoes across time. At the very least, the Great Pyramid is a monument that hums with physical possibility, an architecture that makes modern engineers nervous. So yes, the pyramids are tombs. They are symbols, but they may also be something more. Not power plants in our sense, but structures tuned to forces we have not yet fully learned to read. And that possibility, that the ancients touched a current we barely comprehend, is the electric temptation. It is tempting to laugh at the old travelogues. Their sketches are uneven, their scales distorted, their maps wandering off the page. And yet, if you spend decades walking the plateau, you learn something humbling. Those fragile notebooks sometimes hold things the desert itself has since erased. Early witnesses saw details we cannot. They described corridors now collapsed, walls since quarried for lime, temples whose painted ceilings glittered with stars. Today those stones are bare, the colors gone, the ceilings broken. Their words are clumsy, but they are the only eyes we have into a world that no longer exists. The Danish officer who drew the so-called Fourth Pyramid may have misread. He may have inflated a platform into a monument, but he did not invent the feel of stone so dark it seemed metallic, or the sight of a single massive slab where a capstone should be. Those are sensory memories, not fantasies. Even if he was wrong in a way that deserves attention. Again and again, scattered voices converge. Travelers who recorded paint, reliefs, or alignments that no longer survive. Each account flawed, each indispensable. Together, they remind us that the Giza we see today is not the Giza they saw then, and certainly not the Giza the ancients built. This is why early testimony matters, not because it is perfect, but because it is irreproducible. Once the sand buries, once the city scavenges, once the stone is gone, so is the evidence. The notebook remains as the only witness. We do not trust these sources blindly, but dismissing them entirely is its own kind of blindness. When multiple travelers across centuries describe the same improbable detail, I pay attention, because in their imperfect words may lie the faint outline of something the desert chose to hide. And that raises a darker possibility. What if our history is not merely incomplete, but edited, not by conspiracy, but by erosion, reuse, and silence? What if the past they glimpsed and we dismissed was truer than the one we now accept? Strip away the rumors of lost power plants and alien architects, and what remains at Giza is still enough to steal your breath. Because even without the myths, the pyramids themselves are miracles of ambition and endurance. Picture the scale. More than 2 million blocks, each the size of a small car, stacked into a mountain of stone, with joints so tight that 5 millennia later, a razor blade can't slip between them. Some blocks weigh 70 tons and were dragged from quarries miles away. And yet, across 13 acres, the foundation of Khufu's pyramid deviates from level by less than an inch. That kind of perfection would challenge modern builders with lasers and cranes. The Egyptians managed it with copper chisels, ropes, and sheer will. Now, consider orientation. The Great Pyramid points north more accurately than most medieval cathedrals, deviating only by the width of a fingernail on a compass dial. Its sides curve ever so slightly inward, an invisible correction that prevents collapse under its own weight. These are not the touches of amateurs. They are the signatures of minds who mastered geometry not on paper, but in living stone. And behind the stones, the choreography. To finish Khufu's pyramid in just 2 decades meant laying a block every couple of minutes, day after day, year after year. Imagine the desert alive with sound. Copper hammers clanging, sledges creaking, foremen shouting, thousands of laborers pulling ropes in rhythm, their feet stamping paths into the sand. This was not chaos. It was orchestration on a national scale, the will of a civilization condensed into architecture. And still deeper, the vision. To the Egyptians, pyramids were not tombs in any narrow sense. They were stairways of stone, launching pads for a king's soul, geometric prayers visible for miles. Their gleaming white casing once caught the sun like mirrors, turning the plateau into a theater of eternity. Each block was not only engineering, but theology set in stone. That is what modern myths often miss. These pyramids do not need extraterrestrial help to be extraordinary. They are extraordinary because human beings, with Bronze Age tools, aligned them with the stars and made them endure against time, wind, and history itself. That fact alone should make us tremble. And yet, the paradox deepens. If they could achieve this much without extra help, then what else might they have done? Achievements still hidden, still waiting under the sand, refusing to let us look away. For centuries, travelers and storytellers have hunted for a phantom, the so-called Fourth Pyramid. A black giant, harder than granite, standing apart from the 3 everyone knows. It is an intoxicating image. But maybe the obsession with counting, 3 or 4, is the very thing that blinds us. Because Giza was never a numbers game. It was a landscape of intention. The Egyptians weren't tallying monuments like items on a list. They were weaving heaven and earth together, stone by stone, until the desert itself became a map of eternity. The question worth asking is not how many pyramids, but why these here aligned in this way. Look closer. The 3 Great Pyramids mirror Orion's belt so precisely that even critics concede the resemblance. The Sphinx greets the sunrise at equinox, its gaze locked on the horizon where light is reborn. Temples stitch the river to the tombs, binding the living to the dead. None of this was random placement. It was cosmic choreography, architecture as theology. And here's the twist. What if the fourth that early travelers recorded was never meant to be another colossus, but something subtler? A satellite structure, a ritual space, a monument with a purpose we no longer recognize. Ancient memory bends that way. It exaggerates, it distorts scale, but it never quite forgets the feeling of something extraordinary. That, perhaps, is the real puzzle. We crave the idea of one more, because even 3 pyramids feel insufficient to explain the audacity of this plateau. But the hunger itself is a clue. It tells us Giza is not finished. It resists closure. It whispers that there is always something we have missed. And that is why I cannot close the drawer on the Fourth Pyramid. Not because I am convinced it once stood, but because the question it represents, what are we still not seeing, is the very question Giza has forced us to ask for 5,000 years. Speculation is thrilling, but the desert doesn't yield to words. It yields to tools. If the Fourth Pyramid was ever more than a traveler's mirage, if the labyrinth of the Greeks was more than metaphor, if the Sphinx hides something beneath its paws, then the real challenge is not to argue, but to search. And only now, in our own century, do we finally have the tools sharp enough to try. Ground-penetrating radar has already detected strange voids near the Sphinx, cavities in the bedrock that whisper of deliberate design. Magnetometry can trace the subtle scars of foundations long stripped for stone. Satellites, peering down from orbit, can highlight shallow depressions that match 18th century sketches of a black pyramid just west of Khufu's. And LIDAR, lasers raking the desert, the way they once stripped jungles in Central America, could expose faint geometries no human eye could ever see from the ground. These technologies have rewritten history elsewhere. LIDAR revealed entire Maya cities hidden beneath rainforest canopy. Radar mapped out lost streets of ancient Egyptian settlements buried by floods. Each time, the lesson is the same. What seems invisible is often only waiting for the right lens. But technology alone is not enough. Testimony matters too. When 18th and 19th century travelers described anomalies, shapes, stones, alignments, we can now digitize and compare their notes, treating them not as curiosities, but as data. And when testimony and technology overlap, when an old sketch lines up with a modern satellite anomaly, that is when the desert begins to speak again. The next frontier is not aliens, not fantasy, but the marriage of memory and machine. Legends are useless without instruments, but instruments are blind without stories to guide them. Together, they can peel away sand grain by grain, silence layer by layer. Will this uncover a lost pyramid, a buried labyrinth, or an archive sealed in rock? Perhaps not. But it may reveal something more important, the outlines of what we have missed simply because we stopped looking. And so we return to the paradox. The ancients built for eternity, yet time buried their truth. The secrets are still there. The real question is not whether Giza hides more. It does. The question is, when the evidence comes into focus, will we have the courage to see it for what it really is? It is easy, after centuries of debate, to grow weary, to shrug and say, the Fourth Pyramid never stood. The labyrinth was a metaphor. The Sphinx hides nothing but cracks. Skepticism feels safe. But in burying the mystery, we risk burying something vital. Because mystery is not the opposite of knowledge. It is the spark that drives it. Every great discovery began with someone who refused to let go of a question. The Rosetta Stone, the tomb of Tutankhamun, the lost golden city near Luxor, all of them waited in silence until curiosity pried them loose. Still, mystery is a fire that must be tended carefully. Left wild, it consumes judgment and breeds conspiracy. Left smothered, it dies into dust-dry facts that no one cares to hear. The art lies in balance, to wonder without surrendering reason, to doubt without closing the door to awe. That is why Giza still matters. Walk the plateau at dusk and you feel it. The wind hissing through limestone blocks, the shadows stretching like sundials across the desert floor. On one side, the certainties, millions of stones cut, aligned, and set with a precision that staggers even today. On the other, the silences, the traveler's sketches of vanished pyramids, the rumors of labyrinths, the chambers beneath stone eyes that still refuse to speak. Both sides are true, and together they remind us that history is not just what we know, but what we strain to know. Perhaps that is the gift of mystery. It humbles us. It whispers that our questions are not finished, that the sand still hides more than it shows, and it keeps the drawer of not proven false ajar, so that we never stop listening for what the desert might still reveal. Mystery, in the end, is not our enemy. It is our oldest companion, the twin of knowledge, walking beside us through the dark. At night, Giza ceases to be a monument. It becomes a silhouette of eternity, dark against darker sky, the pyramids like anchors holding the heavens in place. By day, they impress with scale and precision. By night, they whisper of something older, stranger. That stone can be both tomb and promise, silence and song. To the ancient Egyptians, black was never just the color of death. It was the color of the Nile's rich floodplain, the soil that gave life back after destruction, the cycle that made resurrection possible. Perhaps that is why travelers spoke of a black pyramid, harder than granite, standing apart. Whether it stood or not, the symbol survives. The idea that death is not an ending, but a passage toward return. Walk the plateau under starlight, and you feel that paradox. The desert is silent, Yet the stones seem to breathe. Shadows stretch across the sand like sundials of another world. You realize the Egyptians did not fear the night. They built for it. They carved their faith into geometry so that when the sun fell into darkness, it would also rise again. We, the moderns, bring satellites, radars, LIDAR scans. We crave data, and we should. But when the desert wind brushes past and the pyramids loom like blackened mountains, we confront something data cannot measure: awe. The knowledge that human beings, 5,000 years ago, reached toward eternity, and in some ways, caught it. That is the night side of rebirth. It is not the comfort of answers, but the persistence of questions. It is not closure, but the invitation to look again. The pyramids endure because they embody both, the triumph of knowledge and the humility of mystery. And as long as those stones cast their shadows across the desert, we will keep returning, not just to learn what the ancients knew, but to remember what it means to wonder. So what do we make of it all? The whispers of a fourth pyramid, the labyrinth that may have humbled even the Greeks, the Sphinx with its unreadable gaze. Some will remain speculation, others may yet be proven. But together, they remind us of a deeper truth. History is never a closed book. It is a riddle that survives precisely because it refuses to be solved. That is why Giza endures. Not just as stones stacked against time, but as a mirror for us, our fears, our ambitions, our hunger to believe the past was greater than we are. The ancients carved eternity into limestone. We, standing in their shadow, keep returning because we sense that somewhere in the sand lies a truth powerful enough to shake us. And maybe that is the greatest gift the pyramids give. Not certainty, but wonder. If you felt that wonder tonight, if these mysteries stirred something in you, then stay with us. Subscribe to Chronicle of Secrets, share this journey with someone who hungers for history, and leave a comment below. Do you believe a fourth pyramid ever stood? Or is the real mystery not in the stones, but in the questions we keep asking? Because your thoughts are part of this story. Together, we keep the search alive. Together, we keep the flame of curiosity burning. Mystery still matters, and it always will.